The next speaker is Carol Lloyd, who is from greatschools.org. We actually have 3 speakers in this morning's lineup who are all from greatschools.org, which is a great website. It's headquartered in Oakland. It writes a lot of articles on education, brain development, various things. Carol is the executive editor there. She was also the ivory tower editor of Salon.com. She was a real estate writer for San Francisco Chronicle, and she's also written for NPR's This American Life, SF Weekly, Los Angeles Times, New York Times Magazine, a lot of great publications. Okay, are you ready, Carol? Okay, let me bring you the microphone. Here she is. Let's have some applause for Carol Lloyd.
Hi. Does it matter if I talk into the mic? Is it good for the... Okay, great. Well, welcome. I am going to talk more about the the near future rather than the far future. We write about education and learning for educators and parents, and in the last few years I've done a lot of reading about the new science of learning and interviewed a lot of researchers and authors who've written books on this. So I wanted to put together simple outtakes from the new science of learning. A lot of people may know some of these things, but it's really a fast emerging field where new strategies are coming out for how people learn things and building ways to, some of them are so little known and so effective that I think it's really important that our education system moves towards using these. So I'm going to try to practice what I preach today, and so by the end there will be a little test and there will be a story. And I just want to start with everyone to take a second and think about their own education and think about a moment when you learned something that was really, really hard and you did it anyway. And what was the context in which you learned something amazing and difficult and it happened well for you? Was it a teacher? Was it the way you were learning it? Was it the environment? Think about like something that worked for you in your history. So the question is, how do you, oops, I have to click. I'm doing the wrong thing. All right. Nope. So how do you learn new information, ideas, and skills? There's this great new field. It's many, many fields, actually. There's cognitive neuroscience, psychology, and teaching practice, and studies going on inside of classrooms. And all of those together are creating this field. Many of these strategies focus on the intellect. They're focused on thinking about thinking or doing things which are essentially intellectual to improve your learning. But some of the strategies actually have nothing to do with our rational cognitive mind. And I find that really, really interesting and promising in an interesting way. So those are just some foregrounds. I'm trying to manipulate 2 computers here. So basically, learning's hard. And the reason that we know it's hard is that it's actually changing the brain on a physical level. It's creating new pathways in the brain. When you learn something, your brain actually changes. And what this does in terms of strategies, a lot of the strategies that have been developed to help you learn things better, people resist naturally because they aren't easy. And in order to learn something, your brain has to go through a process of effort. And a lot of the favorite learning strategies that are out there are actually create an illusion of knowing something, but then it actually doesn't help you learn that thing at all. So the first strategy I want to talk about is testing. Testing has a horrible rap in our education system right now because it's used as assessment, it's used as evaluation for teachers, but it's not very much used as a learning tool. And the reason that retrieval practice strengthens the connections in the brain is that learning happens through a process of forgetting. So you have the information, you think you know it, you forget a little bit of it, and then that testing experience makes you retrieve it and helps you transfer it from short-term to long-term memory. So testing works best when it's not immediate, it's not right after an experience, when ideas are still in short-term memory, but after some forgetting has taken place. This is an interesting study that was done where they gave people this is in 2011, they gave students from Purdue University study sessions, and they read about an animal, I think it was otters. And some of them had one study session, some of them had a study session, and then right after that they did concept mapping, 25 minutes, and that's supposed to be a very successful way of learning things, concept mapping. Then the third practice, they had people study it, and then they tested them later. And then the fourth practice, they gave them actually the first study session and then 3 subsequent study sessions of this unit on otters. And what they found is the retrieval practice was so much more successful than the others. And if you think about this as like 40% to 60%, that would be the difference between a C and an A on a test. So these strategies can turn a sort of so-so student into a much more, a really excellent student. Another strategy is that the concept of contemplation. There's lots of different kinds of reflection that they're finding make a difference in learning. One is reflection in advance of a lesson. Like what I was asking you to do was to think about some concept, construct around when you learned best. Reflecting after the lesson also knits the new information to the old. And so in general, the more active the engagement, the more you learn it. So writing is better than annotating your reading, and annotating your reading is better than just highlighting. But all those college students that are highlighting their texts in order to, study for an exam, they're actually, the studies show they're not really doing terribly much. So the next idea is that learning is, in the end, you're often put in a situation where you have to do something hard. So you learn in abstract terms a lot, and then you're put into the situation. Doctors have to find that. They start out, they go through many years where they have to practice what they do. But basically, the idea of simulation is evolving as a really important learning strategy. And the most effective way to learn something is to experience it. We know it's been used for years in pilots and medical study. Now it's being added through video games. And it's an interesting thing to think about, like, if we really applied the concept that you have to experience something in order to learn it, how would that change our education system? The fourth one is the concept of switching up your practice. That you don't want to just do something for 8 hours and that massed practice actually doesn't work. You want to interweave it, take breaks, focus on something else. Context and comparison is a really important part of how the brain learns new material. So it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily know when they try to study hard. They study for many hours at a time, but there's a point of diminishing returns. It's one example for why our Korean education system, they're a little bit better than some other education systems like Finland's, but they're not 8 to 10 hours a day better. They spend too much time actually learning stuff in a mass practice. Here's an example of a study where there was sort of a spaced review, and they took a week off between studying things and reviewed the material. And you could see how the forgetting curve is very steep if you learn things only once, but if you review it over time, then you start to retrieve that information from forgetting, and then it gets transferred into long-term memory. And as much as these intellectual strategies show promise, there are actually some more powerful strategies that are far from our cognitive minds. The brain is an organ of the body, for now, until we move on, right? And so they've discovered that aerobic exercise has a huge effect on learning, especially if you do it to break if you're in the middle of learning something and you interrupt learning to do it, or you do it right in advance. And it has to be high intensity aerobics, and it has to be around it. It can't be a day before. It has to be within the hour that you're doing it to make a big difference. They know that aerobic exercise makes the brain transfer material quicker into long-term memory, helps you concentrate on difficult tasks, persist in frustration. They know it changes people's moods, so they're more likely to persist, and helps you correct mistakes in decision-making. In terms of, I just want to say one more thing about aerobic exercise, just that they're doing studies now in schools where they're re-engineering PE, and they're putting PE, they're creating a zero period before the first period. They're taking struggling students, and they're giving those kids like 20 minutes of intense exercise before their hardest subject. And those kids' scores are going really up precipitously. So for instance, in one study, kids in 3 months, their reading levels went up 1 to 2 grades. And these are just sort of unprecedented. There's tons and tons of education strategies which have no results like this. So it's very, very promising, and it's also very concerning now that we're cutting PE out of our schools, and with exercise showing such incredible effects on learning. The other one is the concept of growth mindset, which maybe some of you know. Stanford researcher Carol Dweck discovered this and has been studying this for about 20 years. But all her studies have been done in laboratory settings, and educators have been very, very critical or suspicious that it wouldn't work in the real world. So what she discovered is that people with fixed mindsets who have an idea they're smart or they're not smart, those people will not persist in difficult problems as much as people who have a growth mindset, who think that the mind is plastic, who understand that effort makes a difference, and that your mind grows in intelligence with the activities that you do. So then she went about trying to see if she could teach people to have a growth mindset. And she did it in a really simple way, just by telling people about growth mindset. She did all these laboratory experiments with kids, and then she would test them. Then one control group would get a little talk about brain, and the other control group would get the growth mindset talk. And then she would test them again. And 10 minutes later, after getting the growth mindset talk, the kids in that group, their test scores went up. The kids who did not learn that, their test scores stayed the same. So, but these were small laboratory experiments, and just this week, the first publishing of a large-scale experiment of 1,600 kids where the control group was given study sessions about the brain, learning maybe some of the skills that I've been talking about, and the other one was getting the growth mindset. And the growth mindset kids, over the coming 3 months, their grades went up 14%, and the other side's grades went down. So it's the first example where you see that motivation may trump intellect, because they've been given all these study strategies, and one group can actually use them, and the other group, it doesn't matter. They're not motivated. Their scores are going down. And then the final learning strategy, or in a way it's kind of a teaching strategy that I want to talk about, is the idea of stories. That you can pull people, you can push information out, and you can draw people in with a story. And what they found is that in the neuroscience of stories, that we spend half of our waking hours spinning fantasies in our mind, that we have 100 daydreams per hour. But when we're listening to a story that we are very engrossed in, that roar of distraction finally goes quiet. So if there's a way to build storytelling into teaching, into education, it's a difficult one because you can't go apply it to yourself that way, like, oh, I'm going to go study this and now I'm going to use storytelling. It's a difficult thing to do, but it's an important thing to think about in terms of our education system as a whole. And the reason for storytelling being so important, I just want to talk about one study where they had people do pitches. It's like an MBA class. They did a study where all these MBA students had to do a persuasive pitch. And they used, most of them used a few statistics. Very few of them used a story. And then they asked all the students to write down what they remembered. 73% of them remembered stories. Only 5% of them remembered a single fact. So we know that stories are incredibly powerful learning tools. We don't know, like, there are storytellers in our world, but not every teacher is a great storyteller. So it's a really important skill to evolve for our species, I think, in terms of us becoming better learners, no matter the context. And the final story about storytelling is that there was a study. They created 3 pamphlets to try to raise money to help starving children in Africa. The first pamphlet had statistics about starving children. The second pamphlet had statistics and a story of a little girl named Rokia, who's 7-year-old in Gambia. And the third pamphlet only had the story of Rokia. And then they asked these poor college students to give them money. They were to say, okay, how much money are you going to give us? And they were literally asked to pull out money out of their pocket. And the third, it was the third pamphlet that got 3 times as much money as all the other pamphlets. So these sort of poor college students, once they thought that the money was going to this girl and this girl only, they were willing to give money. When they thought about an abstract issue, they were not motivated. So I want to ask you at this moment, how many learning strategies, raise your hand if you can remember 5 learning strategies. So just, you don't have to say them, just raise your hand if you can remember 5. 1, 2. At least 5, let's say that. If you can, okay. How many can remember 3? Okay. Yeah, I'm cheating, right? So you've got them right there. Okay. But And I guess the question I had is there some new learning strategy that you might use in your daily life and your work that you don't already, that you could incorporate into a new way to learn new material or to learn a new skill or process? And finally, in terms of the long-term focus on this, I just want to say, like, what if all our years that we spent learning, 15 years, 20 years that we're in school, and all that time was spent optimally learning, how different would the intelligence of the human race be? And this is without any technology, it's without us evolving, and it's without smart drugs. So if you just think about that, just by doing the learning how to learn, we could change the nature of human intelligence. And so that's it. Thank you. Yeah. Hi. Concept mapping is something that you say, I'll teach you this issue, and now I want you to create a concept map of it in your mind. So you might take notes, you might draw a picture. You kind of see them a lot. I think MBA students use them. I think they're used a lot in corporations where they kind of map a world or map a process. Yeah, a little bit like mind mapping. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. That's that personal relationship and the passion. Yeah. 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 Well, and there was one study that I didn't talk about, which was about a professor trying to use some of these strategies in large lecture halls because he was really frustrated. The attendance would drop off, the focus would drop off, the good students were doing good, and the crappy students would get worse as time went on. And so he talked about how he used a new model, which he used testing as a model, and he would say, you have to be at the test, and I'm going to test you every 2 weeks or thereabouts. I'm not going to tell you when I test, so you need to come, and you will be tested, and your grades won't matter on the test. So it's no stakes testing, but you have to be there. And the process of testing the kids through the 15-week class, that was one of the strategies where the C minus students came up to being A minus students. So it was a situation where it just got them in the room and it made them think. And then, of course, I think the kids who got an A minus, who had a C minus, probably would have learned some motivation from you as well. But I think it's also a testament, what you're saying is a testament to why growth mindset is so important. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you have the kids who are athletic, they wait till the end of the day and then they do exhaustive, sports. And they're exhausted and they stay up all night and they don't sleep. So, it's Nicole. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, the Waldorf kids, they test low when they're in the younger grades, and then by about 7th and 8th grade, they catch up. So it's interesting. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. You have to make exactly. And that's why testing is maybe helps these that. And with these reading your key programs, they're empowering them. They're saying your reading scores, your reading grades are really low. You need to support your reading. So you need to get here 20 minutes before class, and we're gonna play basketball for that 20 minutes beforehand and see how that works. Yeah. I know. Yeah. Well, they used in a couple of these things. They used kind of self-tracking tools. All the kids were getting about numbers, and so it wasn't how fast they ran. They had to show you need to put out effort. So they focus on effort. Yeah. General ideas.
Thank you. To introduce the next speaker, who is from is Sasan Dabit. She has a BA at UC Berkeley, and she's been working with positive files with them. So here she is. Did I say your name right? Okay.
Thank you. Hello. We're happy to sponsor this conference, and I just want to give you a brief introduction to our company and what we do. So our founder is Dr. Michael Merznick. He is a pioneer in the field of brain plasticity, and he's been working for decades to show that our brain is not static as previously thought, but it's constantly changing, and that's where the word plasticity comes from. And he has dedicated his career to advancing our understanding of neuroscience. He's published over 100 scientific publications, and was a leader for the researchers that invented the cochlear implant. He founded Posit Science to improve our ability to access cognitive training programs. So he wanted to bring the brain plasticity-based cognitive programs out of the lab and into the world, so that people will be able, to use it in their daily lives. And what we have is a team of scientists that develop software programs using the principles of brain plasticity. And the team of scientists includes neurologists, computer scientists, game designers that all work together to invent scientifically validated exercises. And these exercises are web-based, so they're accessible through computers, that pretty much any computer or iPad that has the internet. And so their goal is to have a brain fitness exercise become a part of anyone's daily routine. So this is our Brain HQ platform, and it's our online platform for our cognitive training programs. It has different categories for cognitive training. So as you see, there's attention, brain speed, memory, people skills, intelligence, and navigation. And within those different categories are exercises to really help you develop those cognitive skills. And we currently have 26 exercises cover different sensory and all sensory domains. And this is something, like I said, that can be used with any computer that has the internet, and we currently have it on iPads as well. And for each exercise, it's a particular user, so it's advanced in the training program. Brain HQ has the also been shown to reduce risk of depressive symptom onset.
Yes, I'm very happy to introduce Jyoti Mishra she's our keynote speaker today from Posit Science. She's an assistant professor of neurology at University of California at San Francisco, and she's a senior scientist at Posit Science. Here she is, Jyoti Mishra.
Thanks for the intro, and thanks for coming out, everybody, today on a Saturday. And I'm really glad to be part of this conference, and already listened to two really interesting talks. And it all meshes well with what I'm going to talk about too. So I'll bring up a little bit of what the previous speakers talked about as well. So today I'm here to talk about serious games for stronger brains. That's my job, to build serious games, and also my job as a neuroscientist to understand what happens in the brain when we build serious games. We're at a time where we can actually talk about building serious games because of the technologies that are out there that allow for game making to happen, and then also for game distribution to happen through internet-related platforms. So, before I jump into games, I'll first talk about what technology, where we're at with technology. Technology is immersive. The now and future of technology is omnipresent. These are scenes from daily life that you all would be very familiar with: talking, texting, playing on the computer, playing games, and also sleeping with your personal devices, right next to you, which is not a healthy habit, but in general, these are very familiar scenes. And what you're seeing over here, and what these two individuals are doing, is what's termed in and studied in the sciences as media multitasking, which is when you're engaging with more than one form of media together at the same time. And this happens a lot also these days. We're all trying to optimize how much information we can get through, and how much tasks we can get done all at the same time. So media multitasking has become very common. And whether we like it or not, technology is here to stay. This is, if it's not our lives right now, today, it would be in a few years, where media is immersed in media and technologies is immersed in every part of life, from the moment you wake up, sending wireless signals to your wireless EEG-based signals to your coffee maker to make the coffee for today, or going to work, engaging with the doctor, or the laptop and computer. They're obvious things, and security, getting into buildings, getting into your own workplace, coming out, driving, navigation, GPS systems, and all the way into sleep. Sleep tracking is very common these days. So it's everywhere and involved in every part of our day. And this is 2020 in terms of estimations of the number of connected people is 4 billion. The number of apps is 25 plus million, and there are more embedded systems and more GBs of data. So where am I getting at with all of this? Well, what neuroscientists like to study is we actually are living in a different world. And what does this kind of media exposure and immersion do to our brains? And this has become possible to study over the last decade, and a lot more, because the normal population is engaging with such media. So I'm going to give you both sides of the coin of this story. The first part is media multitasking, which I introduced to you earlier. And that's, this is a famous study that came out in a reputed journal called PNAS in 2009, got a lot of press. This talks about media multitasking, high and low media multitaskers, people who engage with media a lot versus not. So this is one of the tests from the study. It's a memory test where people are presented with items on the screen. They're supposed to remember the exact position, and also the orientation of these red color lines. And then the blue color lines are just distractors. And then after a certain interval of time, a pause, you're presented with another test array, and you're asked whether these lines, these new red lines, match the original lines or not. This is one of the tests in the study. And what you're looking at is performance of low media multitaskers and then high media multitaskers. So this is people who think that they have high productivity, high attention skills, but when you actually test them in the laboratory, this is what you find in terms of that heavy media multitasking leads to performance decline. Then also on the same test, when you look at response times like processing speed, how long it takes you to process this sort of information, well, it turns out when there are distractions that are present, then high media multitaskers tend to have longer response times. So higher is poorer, so longer response times is poorer. So this is one study that showed over multiple tests. I think about 230 people is what they were measuring over, where they showed negative effects of media multitasking. This is another study that came out also in 2009. These are what they were testing high and low media multitaskers on problem difficulty. These are tests called the Raven's progressive matrices tests. So these are tests that are very common in IQ testing kind of problems. And so when you look at the hardest difficulty problems, that's where the high media multitaskers tend to show accuracy decrements. Then here's another study that looked at correlations between they looked in the literature about correlations between different things, but at the same time looked at when you're exposed to violence in the media and how much real life aggression that you show. And that correlation coefficient is about 0.3. It's not very high, but notice that it's about similar to correlation coefficients that are related to smoking and lung cancer, and we all know about that and the public policies that have led to a smoking ban in many public places and so on. So what I want to get from this curve, though, is that all of these studies are correlational. Science is not at this stage about causation, it's about correlation. And so this is an example of that. In this study, they're looking at measures of impulsivity in terms of being impulsive when you have to pay attention to something over a long period of time, in terms of your responses, so motor movements, or not being able to plan, sensation seeking as to how fast you get bored, disinhibited in what you say, thrill seeking. And it turns out that high media multitaskers on a lot of these abilities tend to score higher. So they have there's higher impulsivity and sensation seeking correlates with high media multitasking. So whether these people innately were like this and so they gravitate towards high media multitasking, or that high media multitasking then creates a positive cycle that then leads to high impulsivity and high sensation seeking. I mean, these are questions that science at this stage cannot answer. This evidence is, what I want to remind you is that it's correlational evidence. But still, even though it's correlational evidence, should we be rearing our children and the young of our society, and I'd say even adults, in a high media setting? And so this is a cartoon making it obvious, and this is mostly passive engagement, which is exposure to TV. I like the example of what happened to a lot of the Baby Einstein stuff. There's a really Baby Einstein related bands. There's a really innovative cognitive neuroscientist up at Washington University, Patricia Cole, and she's looked at babies interacting with media from 6 months of age versus talking to a particular person, and not talking, I mean listening to an actual person talking versus listening to media. And then they're exposed to languages, and they found that only when you're actually exposed to languages at even that very early age through an actual person, not through media, that's where you imbibe the knowledge. And she's been one of the first people to be instrumental towards pushing for better quality interaction in children's lives. And also the APA, the American Pediatric Association, talks about no media exposure to children below the age of 2 years.